By the end of that private session in 1971, no one argued about who held authority in the room. There was no announcement, no raised voices, no visible struggle that could be repeated later with accuracy. When it was over, James Coburn thanked Bruce Lee quietly, and the witnesses understood they had seen something they could not properly describe. Not because it was violent, but because it was precise. What happened altered how those present spoke about skill from that day forward. The room itself was unremarkable. A converted training space in Los Angeles, early 1971. No signage, no mirrors placed for vanity. The walls carried the dull marks of use, not decoration. The floor had been cleaned recently, but not ceremonially. This was not a place meant to impress. It was meant to function. Those who entered understood the difference immediately. In that period, Los Angeles was crowded with ambition. Actors trained beside fighters. Stuntmen shared rooms with teachers. Reputation traveled faster than confirmation, and skill was often discussed louder than it was demonstrated. Yet some rooms remained outside that noise. They were known only by word of mouth, passed carefully, as one might pass along a warning rather than an invitation. This was one of those rooms. Bruce Lee did not advertise these sessions. They were not seminars. They were not lessons structured for spectators. People arrived by introduction, and they stayed because something about the space discouraged unnecessary speech. There were no rituals to announce importance, no hierarchy displayed on the walls. Authority here was not declared. It was assumed or discovered. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as quiet, but not relaxed. The quiet had weight. Movement sounded sharper inside it. Breathing was noticeable. Even standing still felt participatory, as though attention itself carried responsibility. This was also an era when martial arts occupied a strange position in American culture, admired, misunderstood, and often reduced to spectacle. Demonstrations were expected to be visible, dramatic, repeatable. Yet what happened in rooms like this resisted all three. It left no clean narrative, only impressions. Bruce Lee arrived as he usually did, without delay, without ceremony. He acknowledged people briefly, not dismissively, but without lingering. He wore training clothes that showed wear, not style. Nothing suggested performance. Everything suggested readiness. Those present did not see him stretch at length. He did not pace or center himself theatrically. His preparation was subtle enough that some mistook it for absence. Only later did they understand that nothing had been missing. The room allowed no separation between practice and reality. There was no bell to begin, no signal to escalate. Whatever occurred would happen inside the same calm that preceded it, and that calm mattered. Because in spaces like this, outcomes did not arrive loudly. They arrived quietly, then stayed. People left changed, but often unsure how to explain why. Stories formed later, shaped by memory and restraint rather than excitement. By the time James Coburn entered that room, the environment had already done its work. It had removed performance from the equation. What remained was attention, expectation, and time. And time in that room belonged to whoever needed it least. James Coburn did not enter the room as an outsider. By 1971, he was already recognized for his physical discipline, his interest in combat training, and his refusal to treat movement as mere choreography. He had trained seriously, not casually. He asked questions that assumed effort had already been invested. That mattered. Coburn was taller than Bruce Lee, broader through the shoulders. His presence carried the ease of a man accustomed to occupying space without apology. Yet witnesses recall that he did not attempt to claim the room. He observed it first. He let the quiet settle before he spoke. He had been invited, not summoned. Their relationship was not adversarial. There was no rivalry announced or implied. Coburn respected Lee's reputation, but respect alone was not the reason he came. He had reached a point common among disciplined men, where accumulated skill begins to raise questions it cannot answer by itself. Bruce Lee did not posture to receive him. There was no speech, no outline of what would occur. He greeted Coburn directly, without deference or challenge. The exchange was brief, professional, neutral. Those watching sensed a difference immediately. Coburn carried confidence built through repetition. Lee carried something quieter. It was not calm in the conventional sense. It was not the absence of tension. It was an economy of presence. Nothing in him seemed prepared to prove anything. Authority often announces itself through control of pace. Here, Lee did not slow the room deliberately. He simply did not hurry. Coburn asked questions. Not many. The questions were technical, specific. They did not challenge Lee's credibility. They tested alignment, whether this training addressed reality or ritual. Lee answered briefly, sometimes with a gesture, sometimes with a gesture, sometimes with silence. No one interrupted. Witnesses later noted that Coburn adjusted his stance during the conversation, subtly. His feet shifted, his weight redistributed. It was not a sign of intimidation. It was a professional reflex and acknowledgement that attention had moved from theory to possibility. Lee did not correct him. In that moment, authority settled into place without negotiation, not because Lee demanded it, but because nothing in his behavior invited doubt. He was not waiting for the session to begin. As far as he was concerned, it already had. Coburn understood this before anyone else did. That understanding, not any spoken agreement, was what allowed what followed to occur at all. And once that threshold was crossed, the room could not return to neutrality. No one declared that something was about to happen. There was no signal to gather closer, no instruction to observe, yet attention aligned naturally, as if the room itself had shifted its weight. Those present adjusted their positions without realizing why. They were no longer waiting. They were witnessing. The tension did not come from threat. It came from clarity. Bruce Lee stood where he had been standing all along. His posture did not change. If anything, it became less distinct, no sharp angles, no fixed guard. He appeared available rather than prepared. That, more than anything, unsettled the room. James Coburn noticed it. He did not mirror Lee's stance. He did not adopt a dramatic posture of readiness. Instead, he became more deliberate. His movements slowed, not to perform control, but to locate it. This was not a challenge issued publicly. It was a private calibration taking place in shared space. The witnesses understood something important at that moment. Whatever occurred would not resemble a contest. There was no audience expectation of victory. No one was counting outcomes, yet the air carried consequence. Because when two men of discipline stand, without speaking, each aware of the other's capacity, uncertainty sharpens perception. Every small movement becomes legible. Every breath matters. Lee's eyes remained soft. They did not track Coburn in a linear way. Witnesses later struggled to explain this. It was not that Lee was unfocused. It was that his attention seemed distributed, not fixed, as though he was listening rather than watching. Coburn adjusted again. This time, more noticeably. His shoulders settled. His hands rose slightly, not defensively but honestly. The room felt smaller. Still, no one spoke. There was an unspoken understanding that asking questions now would diminish something, not knowledge but accuracy. This was no longer about explanation, it was about exposure. Tension is often misunderstood as anticipation of violence. Here, it was anticipation of revelation. Those present later recalled a strange restraint overtaking them, a sense that reacting too quickly, even with the eyes, might cause them to miss what mattered. Some described the moment as elongated, though it lasted only seconds. Time did not slow. Attention did. Bruce Lee took a single step. It was not toward Coburn. It was into alignment, a minor adjustment, barely noticeable unless one was looking for it. But Coburn reacted instantly, not by retreating, not by advancing, but by recognizing the shift. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. The tension peaked not with escalation, but with stillness. a stillness dense enough that the room seemed to hold its breath. Whatever was about to occur would not announce itself. It would arrive and leave before anyone could prepare to interpret it, and those who sensed this most clearly were the ones who said nothing at all. There was no signal to begin, no agreement on terms, no clarification of rules, nothing that could later be cited as structure. What occurred unfolded the way real encounters do without permission. Bruce Lee moved first, though some witnesses disagreed on that point years later. The disagreement itself was revealing. Those closest to the exchange believed Lee initiated. Those farther away believed Coburn did. In truth, the distinction did not matter. The moment belonged to timing, not intention. There was no clash. Lee did not advance aggressively. He closed distance with a restraint that felt almost accidental. One step, then a fraction of another. Coburn reacted not late, but not early enough. His response was correct in theory. His hands moved where training dictated. His weight shifted to stabilize, but Lee was already elsewhere. Witnesses struggled most to describe this part. Not because it was fast though it was, but because it lacked emphasis. There was no dramatic strike, no visible exertion. Lee's movement appeared to resolve a problem that had not yet fully formed. Coburn felt it before anyone saw it. His balance changed. Not violently, not enough to stumble, just enough that his intention could no longer complete itself. His structure collapsed inward, not down. It was the difference between being pushed and realizing you can no longer stand where you intended to. The exchange lasted less than a second. When it ended, Lee was no longer in front of Coburn. He was slightly to the side, his hands lowered, his posture unchanged. Coburn stood still, his breath altered. His eyes focused somewhere beyond the immediate space between them. No one moved. The silence afterward was not shock. It was recognition, the kind that arrives without commentary. Those present did not feel fear. They felt recalibration. Coburn did not attempt to reset. He did not laugh it off or request repetition. He did not ask how it had been done. His body answered for him. He straightened, then relaxed, as though letting go of something he had been carrying unconsciously. Lee said nothing. That absence of explanation was deliberate, not as a lesson withheld, but as a boundary respected. What had been demonstrated was not a technique that improved through repetition. It was an alignment of timing, distance, and intent that could not be extracted from the moment without losing its meaning. Eventually, Coburn nodded. Not deeply, not ceremonially. Just enough. The room exhaled. What had occurred could not be replayed for clarity. It could only be absorbed, and everyone present understood that asking for more would have cheapened what they had just witnessed. The demonstration had not proven superiority. It had removed doubt, and in doing so, it left nothing further to display. The first change was not verbal. It occurred in posture. James Coburn remained where he stood, but his stance no longer held tension. The readiness that had shaped his body moments earlier dissolved, replaced by something quieter. Not submission, not fatigue, recognition. The kind that does not need to announce itself. He looked at Bruce Lee differently now, not as a peer measuring capacity, and not as a student awaiting instruction. It was closer to how one looks at a solved equation, something no longer requiring effort to test. Coburn spoke briefly. Witnesses recall only fragments. A few words of acknowledgement, a tone stripped of performance. Whatever was said mattered less than how it was said. There was no attempt to reframe the moment, no effort to protect identity or pride. Lee listened. He did not respond immediately. When he did speak, it was not to explain what had happened. He did not name principles or break down mechanics. He commented instead on something adjacent: positioning, economy, the danger of relying on strength too early. The words were calm, almost casual, but they landed differently now, not as theory, but as confirmation. The others in the room felt the shift as well. No one asked questions. No one approached Lee for clarification. The urge to speak had receded. What remained was attentiveness without hunger, a sense that something complete had occurred and that pressing it further would diminish its clarity. Coburn stayed for the remainder of the session, but he did not engage again in the same way. He watched. He listened. When he moved, it was with reduced force, increased precision, as though something unnecessary had been removed from his approach. Lee did not correct him. He did not praise him either. The lesson was unfolding without instruction. Witnesses later noted how quickly the room normalized. Training resumed. Conversation returned, but at a lower volume. Nothing dramatic followed, yet everyone present carried an awareness that the hierarchy of understanding had quietly reordered itself. Psychological dominance is often misunderstood as intimidation. What occurred here was its opposite. Lee had not imposed control. He had demonstrated inevitability. Once seen, it could not be unseen. There was no resentment in the room, no discomfort, only acceptance. Coburn left without ceremony. He did not linger. He did not recount the exchange to others as a story. In later years, when asked about Bruce Lee's skill, he spoke carefully. He chose words like clarity and efficiency. He avoided detail. Those who had witnessed the session understood why, because the power of that moment did not lie in what happened, but in what no longer needed to happen afterward. The session was never documented. No photographs, no recordings, no written account produced at the time. It survived only in memory, carried unevenly by those who had been present. Some spoke of it rarely, others not at all. James Coburn did not recount the moment publicly. When Bruce Lee's name arose in interviews years later, Coburn spoke with restraint. He did not reference outcomes or describe techniques. He spoke instead about discipline, about seriousness, about removing what was unnecessary. Those listening sensed that something had been omitted deliberately. Bruce Lee himself never mentioned the encounter. That omission mattered. In the years that followed, Bruce Lee's public legacy grew louder. Films, demonstrations, interviews. Yet among a small circle of practitioners, the quiet stories endured longer. Not as anecdotes to impress, but as reference points. Moments when authority had been settled without declaration. Some of those present at the session would later teach others. They did not retell the event directly. Instead, its influence appeared in how they structured training. Less emphasis on accumulation, more attention to distance, to timing, to restraint. Students sometimes asked where those priorities came from. The answer was usually indirect. A phrase, a pause, a suggestion to observe more closely. By the time Bruce Lee died in 1973, the story had already begun to shift into something else. Not myth, but marker, a quiet reminder that mastery does not require witnesses to announce itself, only witnesses capable of recognizing it. Years later, one of the men who had been in the room reflected on it privately. He noted that the most lasting detail was not the movement, but the aftermath. How no one felt the need to speak louder afterward. How no one tried to recreate the moment. It had done its work. The exchange between Bruce Lee and James Coburn did not change the public understanding of martial arts overnight. It did something slower. It altered how a few serious men evaluated claims of skill. It introduced a standard that could not be performed for applause. Over time, that standard spread quietly. Through training halls. Through choices not to escalate. Through the confidence to stop when nothing more needed to be proven. That is how the incident survived. Not as a story retold accurately, but as a silence preserved deliberately. And in that silence, its lesson remained intact.